set the scene. How old is Alex now?
So Alex is 28 now. I'm 4 years older. I'm 32.
Okay. And when this happened, how old was Alex?
20 years old.
20 years old. And what length of sentence did he get?
19 years. So effectively his entire life again.
Okay. And if nothing happens, if the day-to-day things continue as they are at the moment, what's his earliest day of release?
He will be 39 years old.
And what's the difference, if anything, in the sentence between Cameron, who actually did have the knife and did stab the two, and Alex?
My brother got a mandatory minimum term of 19 years imprisonment, and Cameron Ferguson got 22 years. It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon. He was shopping in TK Maxx and JD Sports, just in the local shopping centre. He gave one of their group a dirty look, or one of their group gave him a dirty look, but it caused the group of four to chase him back to the shopping centre where he knew his friends would be. The emergence of another type of joint enterprise called parasitic accessorial liability, which is different. So for that type, for PAL, you only have to participate in crime A, which could be a spontaneous fight, and you only need to then foresee the possibility that one of your, fellow participants in that joint enterprise would go on to commit the second crime, crime B. So it was based on friends tell each other everything. And I remember watching Alex in cross-examination of his evidence, and he's saying, "Oh, so what do you like to talk about?" The prosecutor, "What do you like to talk about with your friends?" And he said, "Oh, we talk about everything."
Oh dear, yeah.
And then and he says, so you talk about girls? Yeah. You talk about football? Yeah. You talk about everything? Well, not everything. So my brother then, right at the end, towards the end, cottons on. And then that was the argument with Professor Baron Cohen. He's world leading expert in autism, and he agreed to visit Alex in prison and assess Alex for free.
And what did he conclude?
He concluded that Alex has autism.
And you could probably quite easily demonstrate that he's a boy who didn't really foresee all sorts of harms in his life, because he's got a history of doing all sorts of stuff where it's quite obvious that it's going to cause some harm. And I would guess he wasn't foreseeing it. That unlike an anxious or depressed person who knows perfectly well that what they do is harmful and dangerous, he's probably not going to have known that what he was doing was harmful and dangerous, or predicting the harm that would come from it.
In order for the autism to be accepted as fresh evidence, it needs to firstly be reliable, and then it needs to be fresh, and then it needs to be relevant. So we said it's reliable because Professor Baron Cohen has diagnosed him. He's world leading expert. We said it's fresh because he was diagnosed post-conviction.
Yeah.
And we said it's relevant for obviously the reasons why we explained, and Professor Baron Cohen gave evidence about the relevance in court. He actually said it's as if you're convicting Alex of walking into a wall to later find out he is blind. And the model, the CCRC, is meant to be working with, wrongfully convicted people and doing their own investigations to exonerate people, not working against you. But I very much feel like I'm working against them, like they are the blockade.
I have to say, he's probably absolutely hopeless in the therapeutic community, because the whole point of a therapeutic community is for people to try and talk, and for people to try and understand each other's mental models, and how they're functioning mentally. And it's not going to happen, is it, for Alex?
Alex didn't actually tell the therapeutic community in Dovegate that he had autism.
No,
so it wasn't one of the
questions.
So my name's Charlotte. I'm the sister of Alex Henry. who was convicted of murder under joint enterprise. And following his conviction, I became a lawyer. So I'm now a criminal defence lawyer.
Right. And you've worked at Tucker's at one point, is that right?
Yes. Yeah, most recently with Tucker's solicitors.
Yeah. So you've got lots of experience of representing people in criminal cases.
Yeah.
So Charlotte, first of all, can we just get a little set the scene? How old is Alex now?
So Alex is 28 now. I'm 4 years older. I'm 32.
Okay. And when this happened, how old was Alex?
20 years old.
20 years old. And what length of sentence did he get?
19 years. So effectively his entire life again.
Okay. And if nothing happens, if the day-to-day things continue as they are at the moment, what's his earliest day of release?
He will be 39 years old.
And that's the earliest time he could get out unless something else happens in the meantime.
Yeah. And ordinarily you don't tend to get out bang on your parole date. Takes a few attempts. Also because you have to, it's better if you admit guilt in order to, quite persuasive reason to get parole, you admit guilt and you've worked on your offending behaviour. He can't do that. So we'll cross that bridge when he's 39.
How many prisons has he been in?
He's been in Felton Young Offenders. That was the first one. Then he was moved to Belmarsh. Then he was moved to Pentonville. Then Whitemoor, which is in Cambridgeshire. And at the moment, he's in Dovegate.
So they've moved him around quite a lot. Now, those are mainly Category A prisons, aren't they? Or are they all?
Whitemoor is a Category A prison. I'm not entirely sure about Dovegate,
Right.
but Whitemoor definitely is.
Silly question, I suppose, because we know the answer anyway, but how's he found it in prison? What's it been like for him?
At first, it was very difficult, obviously struggling with the conviction itself. And I know that he seemed quite unwell around the time of the conviction. Then he moved to Whitemoor, and it was okay. There was, unlike Feltham Young Offenders, which was incredibly violent, and almost like the guards would stand by and watch children attack one another in the visiting hall. And these are children and their but big children, and their parents would be powerless. And it was just a really awful institution. But when he moved to Whitemoor, it was very, very little violence. The guards, the officers were always very, very respectful and kind to the visitors, which was good. So he did okay there. And he's just moved to Dovegate and he's been put on the TC wing, which is therapeutic community. So he has a phone in his cell and a shower in his cell, and he's out of his cell quite a lot of the day, which is really good for, his mental health and forcing him to communicate with other people as well.
I think the staff there are very kind.
Yeah.
But the prisoners who are part of the therapeutic community are very often extremely damaged individuals who've been abused through their childhoods, and their violent offending is related to their childhood experience. And the therapeutic community aims to help them resolve some of those childhood experiences. And that doesn't sound as it's part of your brother's experience. So it may be a good environment from that point of view, from the point of view of psychological care, but the people he would be in the therapeutic community with would be people who had been severely damaged by their childhood abuse and other life experiences.
Charlotte, tell us, I think now we've got a bit of the setting. Tell us what happened on that day when obviously the world turned upside down for Alex.
So it was a Tuesday afternoon in August 2013. He was out shopping with 3 friends. He came out of shop with one friend to see 2 of his friends across the road being circled by a group of 4 older looking men. He knew that this must have been a violent standoff because one of his friends was brandishing a bottle, and 2 of the other group had taken their belts off and were wrapping them and swinging them. So he ran in with his friend that he was in the shop with.
Can we just stop a moment, Charlotte? He'd been in a shop with his friend.
Yes.
Shopping,
yes.
They were out shopping.
Yeah.
They weren't doing anything.
No, it was a sunny Tuesday afternoon. He was shopping in TK Maxx and JD Sports, just in the local shopping centre.
And he and his friend, the one friend he was in the shop with, had gone into the shop together. The others had stayed out, but they were in a group together. There were
four of them in a group together.
Right. So he came out and saw the other two caught up in some scene.
Yes.
As you say, violent, being threatened.
And this is on an afternoon. They were getting their belts out, and I mean, really kind of, they were into, they were going to behave badly, weren't they? It seemed.
It was obvious.
Yeah.
It was on the brink of violence when my brother ran into him. What he hadn't known is this standoff had been going on for about 10 minutes before. So while he's shopping, there's a standoff going on outside, which was actually instigated by the other group, who chased one of Alex's friends, and then the other one joined.
Yeah.
And are there people looking? Are there what's happening around them? Is a crowd gathering? Are the police being called? What's happening?
So I'm not sure if the police were called at that time, but there were certainly people watching. There were a lot of witnesses eventually at the trial, and the shopkeepers. So my brother's friend, who was brandishing the bottle, had actually just stolen that bottle to protect himself. That was his account of it. He ran into, when he was chased, he ran into the local cost cutters and grabbed a bottle and was brandishing it, stay back. And so the shopkeeper was outside as well, saying, put the bottle back. And that was what was going on.
Was that he didn't break the bottle? It was just a full bottle, was it? Or did he break it?
No, it was just a full bottle. And actually after the fight itself, that bottle was found intact. So he never used the bottle during the course of the fight either.
And just a little bit more background. The four guys who had gathered aggressively, were they known to your brother? Were they people he knew?
No, complete strangers. Right. So the boy with the bottle had initially been by himself, and he was walking down the road near the shopping centre because he separated himself from the group briefly, and he gave one of their group a dirty look, or one of their group gave him a dirty look, but it caused the group of four to chase him back to the shopping centre where he knew his friends would be.
Yeah.
Are there security people around? Because shopping centres normally have some, pretty tough men wandering about, don't they?
Well, this was in like Ealing Broadway suburbs, so there's not really any security.
Okay. So
he rushes in.
What happens?
Yes. So he rushes in, and as he reaches the group, the violence erupts around him. He saw one of his friend's phone fall out of their pocket. So he's picked that up and he's thrown that at one victim. And then as kind of fists are flying towards the end of it, he also punches another victim. I call them victims because those are the two boys that were stabbed during the course of the incident. So the violence lasts 47 seconds, and probably during the first 20 seconds of that time frame, two people are stabbed, Borhain Kaziki and Taki Kaziki, and they're stabbed by Alex's friend Cameron Ferguson, the person he had ran out of the shop with. Cameron Ferguson, after causing the fatal injury, ran off in the opposite direction. So we just see him enter, and then he's caught on cameras running down a road. None of my brother's group know where he's gone or why he's gone or what's happened, because fists are still flying, the victims are still punching them. Alex gets his friend, Janelle Grant Murray, who is later convicted of the murder alongside Alex, and they run back to the shopping centre. And they are actually, in fact, pursued by the victims because the victims don't realise they've been stabbed. So they get to the shopping centre. Once from the shopping centre, they begin to call Cameron Ferguson, who we know has run off in the opposite direction. Cameron Ferguson's phone is off. So they don't actually know at the scene or for the next hour and a half that anyone has been stabbed.
Right.
Because they've left the others in the street, the group of aggressors.
Yeah, they ran. They ran back to the shopping centre. They were pursued by the aggressors until the aggressors realised that they had been stabbed, and one had been stabbed fatally. And you can see kind of the moment of realisation on the camera, which is very sad.
So who had the knife?
Cameron Ferguson.
He brought it with him?
He would have had that on the shopping trip.
Right. Why do you think he was carrying a knife? Did he ever say?
He was homeless at the time, so he had quite a sad backstory and was sofa surfing. That's all really I know about it. He didn't have a long criminal record. I don't believe he had any criminal record at all, but so, I think that's why.
And did Alex know he had a gun, had a knife?
He's always denied knowing that that he knew that Cameron had a knife.
Do you believe him?
Yes, only because I believe he would have told me. And
what sort of knife was it? I mean, a long knife or a short knife? I mean,
from the description, it sounds quite long. Like they said that because it went through the back and it went through the aorta and then into the lung. So like a kitchen knife, I believe.
So does everybody go home after a while then? Well, obviously the ones who are stabbed don't, but everyone just goes back not knowing that some one of them is dying.
So they were walking through the shopping centre, then they get to Lammers Park, and they're still trying to make contact with Cameron Ferguson. Yunus Taib, who was another one of the group, he lived literally opposite from where the fight was. It almost happened outside his house. During the course of the fight, Yunus Taib's mother has come out of the house, told him off and told him to get back in. So he's then followed his mum. So they're also speaking to Yunus, saying, when's your mum letting you back out? To come back out, we're going to be in the park. And so they stayed in the park for not very long because they assumed Cameron was nearby and they were trying to get him to meet them at the park. After probably an hour of no contact, they then continue with the day's plans, which was to go to a youth club, which is the local youth club near where we all lived. So they went to the youth club and they get out of the taxi and Cameron Ferguson is there. And that's when they're told.
That's when they're told what?
That Cameron Ferguson had stabbed 2 people.
He told them?
Yeah, so he told them. So Eunice, Janelle and Alex step out of the taxi and Janelle goes to Cameron, there you are, why weren't you protecting me? Cameron says, I poked 2 of them. And then obviously the discussion involves what, who, why, and etc. Yunus Taib, he with his mobile phone smashes it against the wall because he's really angry, and he goes straight home and then later hands himself into the police because he knows the police are going to be looking for him. Janelle Grant Murray goes to stay with a friend while he's trying to figure out what to do, but eventually hands himself into the police. My brother goes to Croydon to hide with Cameron Ferguson.
Right. Where does he go? Where's he hiding? Someone else's place?
Yeah, so they had Alex called his friend and asked to stay in Croydon because my brother had his girlfriend was pregnant at the time. So his girlfriend was pregnant and it was a 12-week scan on a Friday. This happened on a Tuesday. And my brother's intention was to avoid arrest until Friday, go to the scan, and then hand himself in. Right. Reason being that she hadn't told any of her family that she was pregnant, and we didn't know either. So it was, 2 young people wanting to go to the scan together. He also didn't think that he was going to be, a suspect in anything. He thought he was going to be arrested to be interviewed or, because he's there, he's part of the fight, but not arrested for murder.
Do they know there's been a murder yet? at that
Not
stage?
yet. They find that out when that same night they find that out. So he then goes to Croydon to stay with his friend, but before he leaves to go to Croydon, Cameron then calls that same friend and asks to stay at the same place.
Right.
So they end up going there together, but not together.
Yes, they didn't jointly plan that.
Yeah. It was both. That was the only friend that they both knew. But then once they find out that it's been a murder, Alex decides to stay with Cameron and he travels about with Cameron. So they then move from Croydon to another area of London and then back, whereas the other two handed themselves in.
Right. So what happens after that then? When do the police have to find them and arrest them, or do they give themselves up? How does it work?
No, the police. So my brother called me and he said something really bad has happened. I can't tell you what it is, but can you? My girlfriend's pregnant. There's a lot of information I was being fed, and I remember when he said my girlfriend's pregnant, just forgetting about apparently there's this bad news, just focusing on the pregnancy story. So I was like, oh no, you're an idiot. It was quite, I don't know, it was like I just suddenly saw like it was being funny and positive, and then he said no, like kind of regrounded me and said there is something really bad that's happened though. I can't tell you what it is. And then I was like, okay. And then he said, I need you to pick me up, take me to the scan with Shanice, and then take me to the police station afterwards. So I knew something had happened and didn't know what. And then when news reports started coming out about there being a stabbing in Ealing, me and my dad had a conversation. He said, you don't think that he was there or involved in any way? And I was like, no, it wouldn't be that. It definitely wouldn't be that. And then it transpired that it was that.
Right. Okay. Had he been in trouble with the police before, Alex? Or
yeah, he had quite. It was a criminal record, but he had basically an ASBO. So he was given an ASBO when he was, I think, like 13. And so he kept breaking his ASBO all the time, just because the ASBO said you're not allowed in these areas. And then he would go to those areas. So it wasn't really crime on his record. The only thing, criminal offences he had a common assault when he was 12. He had riding on the back of a stolen motorbike, being on the back of someone else's stolen motorbike when he was 14, and a lot of possession of cannabis. So constantly found and arrested for possession of cannabis. But that's it.
So was he bright as a boy, or did he have problems with education?
He was gifted and talented, but then he was expelled from school. Towards, I don't know, about 7 years old, he started refusing to go to school and being terrified of going to school. He was quite badly bullied around that time as well. And would actually physically scale the walls of the school to escape school. He just wouldn't go in. And coupled with that, there was a lot of meltdowns at home, really kind of bad behaviour, or what we perceived as bad behaviour. And he was pulled out of his first school, and then he was put in a private school because my mum thought he would cope better with the smaller classrooms. And he did well there for like a period of time with the smaller classrooms, and the teachers were really lovely. But then eventually got expelled from there, and then he got put back into a state school, and he got expelled within the first term of his state school.
Oh.
And then after that was put in an alternative provision. Now we know the reason why he had this conduct problem. He has autism. So it's actually incredibly common with autism to have these kind of aggressive looking meltdowns. Not that he would hit anyone, but would melt down screaming and pulling things. He was almost sectioned when he was 9 years old. So it was quite prevalent. But they didn't know it was autism. They thought it was such bad depression and anxiety that he might have had psychosis at age 9. But we now actually know that it's all signs of autism. this
So when was
obsessive
that
behaviour.
diagnosed then, Charlotte?
Not until after he was convicted.
Right.
So he was expelled, kind of society turned its back on him. He was put in this alternative provision full of people that might also have autism or other mental health issues, but also a lot of, disruptive, loud people all around him, which didn't help at all, unable to get any GCSEs. And he was gifted and talented. So he used to be top of his class for maths. He loved chess. He played chess all the time. To go from that and getting such great grades to school expulsion in an AP provision where people are getting robbed with knives outside. It was such a kind of fall. And he was just unable to get like a job. He started when he was finally old enough to work. But by that point, he's already got so many convictions, right? So he's got an ASBO and loads of convictions. So he can't go into college. So he begins to work in carpentry with my dad. My dad kind of took him under and tried to get him to learn a trade with him. He had 7 separate assessments spanning from age 9 to 14 by CAMS.
So can I just interrupt you and ask about that? When you say CAMS, which hospital was that at? Do you know? Or which team was it?
I think it would have been West London, Ealing.
And they came up with a diagnosis of depression, anxiety, or even maybe a psychosis. But what was your impression? Because you're a bit older than him. Was he always depressed? Or could he be cheerful?
It wasn't really so much cheerful. He always looked a bit sad behind the eyes and a bit, instead of cheerful, hyperactive and manic. But those symptoms are very similar with autism, or depression can exist.
Oh, I understand that. But he found life difficult, I guess, is what it sounds like. Yes, or the environment was difficult, particularly if it was unpredictable, presumably, or chaotic.
Yeah, so we found the symptoms, the hardest to manage after my parents divorced. So he was 7 and I was 11. And we would do one day at dad's, the next day at mum's, one day at dad's, the next day at mum's. And that was hard for me to kind of deal with, the packing up of the bag and the different rules. It was an acrimonious divorce as well, very acrimonious. So they never agreed to having the same rule sets. Dad was far more lax. Mum was quite, regimented with homework and stuff. So that was difficult. But for my brother, especially now knowing, that's when his symptoms, and that's when he was 2 years into the divorce, was when he was almost admitted for psychosis.
So what happened next then, Charlotte?
So they track Alex and Cameron to the flat in Croydon and they arrest them. And Alex is arrested for murder and he's charged with murder the following day.
And then he's on remand. He's
in remand in Feltham Young Offenders.
Yeah.
So he was there. At the time, I had studied law before, so I knew vaguely about joint enterprise. I then kind of got out my law books, had a Google to refresh myself, and then I came across this campaign group, JENGBA, Joint Enterprise Not Guilty by Association. And in my mind, joint enterprise accessorial liability is where one person commits the crime and you're guilty as an accessory because you intentionally assist or encourage the crime by shouting, stab him, or holding him down in order to be stabbed. And I couldn't see that in the factual makeup of Alex's case. I couldn't see it. So I then read deeper and hadn't realised I was a crap student before and hadn't realised about the emergence of another type of joint enterprise called parasitic accessorial liability, which is different. So for that type, for PAL, you only have to participate in crime A, which could be a spontaneous fight. And you only need to then foresee the possibility that one of your, fellow participants in that joint enterprise would go on to commit the second crime, crime B. So that fit with Alex's case. He did participate in crime A, albeit he says in self-defense or defense of another. But he did, there is the de facto participation is there. And the question remaining is, did he know Cameron Ferguson had a knife? And if he did, it's only a very small jump to foreseeing the possibility, not that he would, but foreseeing a possibility that he would use it during the course of the fight, which isn't, far removed. Once you know someone has a knife, of course you can foresee it. You can foresee all manner of things.
Yeah. But do you think he did know he had a knife?
There was no evidence of knowledge of a knife. But
nothing came up in evidence then like that?
No, they said friends tell each other everything. And therefore, if friends tell each other everything, my brother would have known Cameron carried a knife during the course of the shopping trip. Right. And then would have known about it during the course of the fight and would have therefore foreseen it. So it was based on friends tell each other everything. And I remember watching Alex in cross-examination of his evidence. And he's saying, oh, so what do you like to talk about? The prosecutor, what do you like to talk about with your friends? And he said, oh, we talk about everything.
Oh dear, yeah.
And then and he says, so you talk about girls? Yeah. You talk about football? Yeah. You talk about everything? Well, not everything. Then my brother then, right at the end, towards the end, cottons on. And then that was the argument.
So that's how they got it in court.
So he got convicted of murder then. Is that right?
Yeah, he was.
And what's the difference, if anything, in the sentence between Cameron, who actually did have the knife and did stab the two, and Alex?
My brother got a mandatory minimum term of 19 years imprisonment, and Cameron Ferguson got 22 years. So there's a 3-year difference between the person that wielded the knife and stabbed 2 people and the person that foresaw it, or allegedly foresaw it.
Did any of the others get convicted of anything? Because there were,
Janelle Grant Murray, he didn't hit anyone during the course of the fight. He was the one with the bottle, but was very quickly disarmed of the bottle, and the bottle was found intact.
Yeah,
and was beaten up by the victims. So he got 19 years.
He got 19 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the others?
Eunice, who was the other guy, wasn't he?
Eunice, so during the 10-minute standoff, Eunice had tried to stop the fight kicking off. He was trying to remonstrate with the victims and remonstrate with Janelle, standing in the middle of them all. And because of that, the jury couldn't then believe that he would have had any participation in the fight itself. He does admit that he held someone in the fight in a headlock at the moment that person was stabbed. But the person that was stabbed, who was held in a headlock, said he believed Eunice did it to prevent his own violence rather than for him to be stabbed. And the jury obviously believed that as well.
Right.
And then can we talk a bit about what's happened since then? Because he's, you've told us that he traveled through various prisons, but there are attempts to overturn the verdict.
Yes.
And part of that's on these mental health grounds, aren't they? So,
yeah.
Or a lot of it is on that basis, isn't it?
So following his conviction, we did a lot of press to, exonerate Alex. And one of the articles I did was in the Daily Mail U magazine. And I describe Alex, about our slightly different upbringings, the fact that I was brought up mostly with mum. He found it very difficult being moved from, shipped from pillar to post. So, and how he displayed the anxiety, the excellence at maths and chess. And someone contacted me through a website which was dedicated to Alex's innocence. And she said, have you thought about having Alex assessed for autism? Because from the way you describe him, it sounds like he has autism. I didn't do anything immediately with that information. I actually was like, oh, no, I don't think he is, because he's got quite a lot of empathy. If I explain why I'm upset, he's sympathetic with me. So I didn't think that he had autism, and I ignored it. A few months later, it's Christmas, we're at my grandparents'. My mum said, oh, I always regret not getting Alex assessed before trial. I know he had those other assessments, but, you know, I think I've always thought that there's something wrong with him. And I said, oh, funny you should say that. We got contacted a few months ago by this lady. She seemed to know quite a lot about autism because she was sending me links about where to get Alex assessed. And the different places in my particular area to go. So I told my mum, and that was it. It was like she was going for that. She was going to get Alex assessed for autism. She contacted lots of different experts, but they were unable to do it because you need your legal team on board to get Alex assessed. And our legal team didn't have any legal aid at that point. But she then got in contact with Professor Baron Cohen. He's world leading expert in autism, and he agreed to visit Alex in prison and assess Alex for free.
And what did he conclude?
He concluded that Alex has autism.
So that gave you a bit of a lever, didn't it, in terms of moving forward with the sentencing and the conviction?
Yes. So it was brilliant. I thought Alex was going to come home once we had that diagnosis, because for me, that's proof that Alex is innocent. So in order to be guilty under the law that Alex was convicted under, Alex had to foresee the possibility that Cameron Ferguson would stab the victim and would stab the victim while intending to kill or cause him serious bodily harm. People with autism really struggle with understanding the emotions and intentions of other people. An intent to cause serious bodily harm is so nuanced that in a 47-second affray, or actually the first 20 seconds in which that did happen, I can't see that there's any way that an autistic adult would be able to foresee that in 20 seconds. So to me, that was evidence that he is innocent.
And you could probably quite easily demonstrate that he's a boy who didn't really foresee all sorts of harms in his life, because he's got a history of doing all sorts of stuff where it's quite obvious that it's going to cause some harm. And I would guess he wasn't foreseeing it. That unlike an anxious or depressed person who knows perfectly well that what they do is harmful and dangerous, he's probably not going to have known that what he was doing was harmful and dangerous, or predicting the harm that would come from it.
Yeah, especially when it comes down to the ASBO. So Alex understood things very literally. And the ASBO said, you are not allowed to be with this person in a public place. So Alex went, okay, well, a taxi isn't a public place, is it? So they would get a taxi. Or I'm not allowed to be with that person in a public place. Okay, so the police would often see this person walking down the road, and then about 50 meters behind him, Alex walking down the road, waiting, this person going to the chicken shop, coming out, and immediately you're together. You don't have to be standing side by side. I know you two are for the purpose of your outing together. So it's all of that. He's understanding things very, very literally.
So, and this is important because people need to think about the meaning of the behavior that they're observing. It's not good enough to simply say somebody's anxious and depressed, and that's why they're careless, or just do stuff which is, self-destructive. There's, that what you're describing is a, too clever by half interpretation of the rules by somebody who's trying to work it out and getting it wrong. It's not a person who's depressed thinking, I don't care what anybody thinks, and I'm just, life is hopeless, therefore I might as well just do whatever it is that I want to do because because it's also hopeless. And in a depressed kind of frame of mind, it's a very different meaning behind the behavior, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very different.
So you've got this piece of paper, you've got this report saying he's got autism. You're overjoyed, it sounds like, at the prospect of but it didn't work out, did it?
No. And I'm still to this day really shocked. I just don't understand I'll explain why. In order for the autism to be accepted as fresh evidence, it needs to firstly be reliable. and then it needs to be fresh, and then it needs to be relevant. So we said it's reliable because Professor Baron Cohen has diagnosed him. He's world leading expert. We said it's fresh because he was diagnosed post-conviction.
Yeah.
And we said it's relevant for obviously the reasons why we explained, and Professor Baron Cohen gave evidence about the relevance in court. He actually said it's as if you're convicting Alex of walking into a wall to later find out he is blind. That's how important his diagnosis is to this particular offence. And we waited. The judgment took a while to be handed down. I think it was about 2 months. And on the 11th of August 2017, it was handed down and it was rejected. They said that it's not reliable because Alex was assessed 7 times previously. None of those people came to a diagnosis of autism or identified autism. And so why is Professor Baron Cohen right and these 7 people wrong? It's not fresh because you haven't given a reason as to why he wasn't examined before trial rather than after trial, because it has to be not reasonably available at trial. So if there's such an obvious problem, the legal team are meant to assess. And they said in any case it's not relevant, but they didn't say why. They just said in any case not relevant. And there was no contrary opinion. So the CPS could have got their own expert. The judges could have ordered their own expert report. Neither of those things happened. They just said it's not relevant. They disagree with Professor Baron Cohen without saying why. Anyway, following that, we worked towards making an application with the Criminal Case Review Commission. Now, I had my reservations about the CCRC. They've got a lot of negative press. They don't tend to refer many convictions at all. But I thought, well, if they're going to refer one, it'll be Alex's. So we got Alex examined again by another leading expert called Dr. Mark Woodbury-Smith. He went and met Alex, he examined him, and he diagnosed Alex with autism. And in relation to the reliability, he said, the reason why me and Simon Baron Cohen are right are because we're leading experts in the field of autism. You can't get better than us. We don't even know the specialisms of the 7 people that assessed Alex before, their level of qualifications. And also, this was in the 90s, where autism was routinely not identified because it was only very, very severe autism that practitioners were familiar with. So the understanding of autism has expanded as years have gone on. He said that we got also a letter from the previous trial legal team to say the reason we didn't examine Alex is because he had these 7 mental health assessments done previously and we relied on them when we shouldn't have. So that's a pretty good reason as to why we haven't then gone and got a second another report. And the third reason, we're kind of stuck really because the Court of Appeals said it's not relevant without telling us why. So we don't know what we're fighting against. If they had said it's not relevant because of this, then we would go, oh, you've just misunderstood autism.
Yeah. We'll
just do a second report about why you've misunderstood this key point. Because I imagine the Court of Appeal can't substitute their own ill-informed opinions over the leading expert in the world. They would have to have a reason why, and then that reason why could be debunked. But they didn't give a reason why. So all we could do with the second expert is for him to review what Professor Baron Cohen said about the relevance. Obviously, he agreed. Obviously, he reiterated it. And then our argument with the CCRC was that, well, now you've got 2 experts saying the same thing rather than 1. 2 are more reliable generally. And we believe if you're 2 of the world leading experts saying that the diagnosis was relevant, the Court of Appeal would not have rejected that. So that was our argument. 2 is better than 1 when it comes to relevance. That was rejected.
By the CCRC?
CCRC, yeah. They said, sorry.
Well, I was just wondering, you did all the work for that. Did they do any work at all?
No, they didn't do their own. They didn't get their own expert. They didn't try to contact our expert and ask questions. They just said, computer says no. They said, we agree that Alex is autistic now. You've got two experts rather than one. We agree that he's autistic, or close to it. They said it's persuasive or something to that effect. They said, we agree that it's fresh, or you've persuaded us that the evidence is fresh, but it's not relevant because this Court of Appeal said it's not relevant. But they
don't define why. They don't say why.
I know, they don't. So it's literally just like banging your head against a brick wall because they're just saying computer says no, that's it. So we had a chance to write our response to the CCRC, put in further submissions. So in relation to the relevance, I noticed that when they said computer said no, they had underlined two extracts of the judgment. And from those underlined extracts, it appears that the CCRC may have interpreted the judgment to mean that because Alex didn't suffer a sensory overload at the scene, he didn't have a theory of mind difficulty, because we had two separate arguments on relevance: sensory overload, which is where you can't see anything kind of really going on or understanding what's going on. And then you've got the theory of mind, which I think every autistic person has, which is understanding the emotions and intentions of others. So the Court of Appeal said they didn't believe that Alex had a sensory overload at the scene because Alex was able to explain what happened at the scene quite, well. And he did, therefore he might not have had theory of mind. So those were the two sections. So anyway, I said that in my response was that not all autistic adults will experience a sensory overload. That's an over what's it called when you're bringing in too much, light, sounds, senses, and then you melt down. But every autistic person has a theory of mind deficit where they will struggle with understanding the emotions and intentions of others. And that's why it forms part of the diagnostic criterion when you're diagnosing people with autism. And we had that also supported by the report. So that's what I've come back with. I've said, this is how you've appeared to have, because you've underlined that and underlined that. It appears that you've interpreted the judgment this way. But now they're obviously going to come back and say, we didn't interpret the judgment this way. But I hope that they'll say, this is how we do interpret it, and then we can move forward. But I've got a feeling that they won't tell me why.
What kind of timescale do you think you're on with the CCRC now?
Probably within 2 months. So we got an email the other day to say the decision has been moved on to the commission or commissioners. If it's commissioners, it's a yes. It will be referred back to the Court of Appeal, or likely to be yes. If it's commissioner, then it's a no. And that's more of like a rubber stamp exercise. I've got a feeling that it's going to be the single commissioner, because we got the same email as we did last time. And apparently when it goes to the panel, it's a slightly different email.
When do they base this idea of Alex being able to describe very well what had happened? What I'm wondering is if he must have at some point seen the CCTV. I mean, he probably didn't see it on the day he was interviewed at the police station, because that would probably not have happened. But he would have seen it potentially several times during the trial, leading up to the trial, wouldn't he?
Yes,
so he would easily be able to remember that, because I would have thought, like the kind of person who would have really, gone into the detail of it. He could watch it and see it and work it out. So, I mean, how can they say?
But as you say, it's not diagnostic anyway. I mean, anybody can suffer from sensory overload.
Yeah.
I mean, you described not being able to remember the family sessions,
yes.
in psychiatric assessment previously, and that's probably sensory overload. We can all suffer from that. That's not diagnostic of autism,
especially under stress.
Absolutely, and very hard for people to remember what's happened.
But people seem to be kind of just applying their own impression of things, don't they? Well,
everybody's an expert in psychiatry. Everybody seems to have an opinion.
And there was something also said, wasn't that you haven't covered it yet, Charlotte, about your mum.
Yes.
Yes.
So my mum has a PhD in psychology. Ironically, she went into psychology because my brother was displaying meltdowns, and because of the assessments weren't leading to any diagnosis apart from depression, anxiety. She thought maybe conduct disorder or something like that. But she went in, she did her access to psychology because she had left school without any GCSEs. And then she went to university and she did her PhD. So the prosecution during the course of the appeal said that my brother had coached Alex in how to act autistic and to pull the wool over Simon Baron Cohen's eyes.
That's such an extraordinary argument.
But the judge seemed to accept that, didn't she? Or one of the judges accepted that?
It was listened to. It wasn't, the argument wasn't shut down. It never found its way into the judgment itself. So right. We can't say what the Court of Appeal agreed with, but I believe it was certainly a factor because I didn't think the fact that there were 7 mental health assessments previously, when we've got Simon Baron Cohen, head of the Autistic Society at Cambridge University, was a good enough reason. And easily
tricked, they would like
nonsense.
To believe.
It's absolute nonsense. It's transparent. If people can't fake autism, that's absolute nonsense. People try to fake all sorts of things, but not that. You wouldn't know how to. I mean, obviously, that nobody knows what autism is, so they can hardly fake it. How would you know if somebody's fake? How would the judge know if somebody was faking autism? It's just a crazy suggestion. It's such a kind of small print, microscopic issue that it's not even worth the air that's spent talking about it.
And I read my brother's reports, and so afterwards, obviously, I've got the reports and what Alex was describing, and I was like, "Wow, you feel like that?" Like the way he describes his communication and the way he talks, it's such small little things that you wouldn't know to say that. Like he said, I don't like sitting in a room talking to people, so what I do is I like to play games. Because, like pool or something, like an activity or football, he prefers that because there's less moments of chat, if you know what I mean? And so other like little things that I've never identified, that I've known about him, and that I wouldn't think that you'd be able to fake because they're so small.
I have to say, he's probably absolutely hopeless in the therapeutic community because the whole point of a therapeutic community is for people to try and people to try and understand each other's mental models, and how they're functioning mentally. And it's not going to happen, is it, for Alex?
Alex didn't actually tell the therapeutic community in Dovegate that he had autism.
No,
so it wasn't one
notice.
Of the questions. It wasn't one of the questions because he thought if I put that down, they might not let me in.
They wouldn't. That's right.
But he really wants to, because the Kaizen one, the one that's probably he's more suited for because it's less intense, that was a really, really long waiting list. And doing one of these courses is the only way you're going to decategorize yourself and get out on your parole date. So he was like, well, I have to do it. But he's doing okay.
No, of course, when it's probably a nicely structured environment with a routine and everybody knows what's going to happen, and as long as he keeps quiet and doesn't try to understand anybody's mental functioning, he might get away with it.
So what happens next then? We're waiting for the CCRC to come up with their decision, but it doesn't sound as though you're that optimistic about it.
I'm not optimistic. The best I hope for is they actually interpret the Court of Appeal's decision, because then we know what we're fighting against. We have to know why they say it's not relevant in order for us to then move forward, because there might just be a fundamental misunderstanding and we can go back to our experts and say this is what they think. Is that correct? Teach them about autism. So that's the plan. I've already contacted Alex's caseworker at the CCRC and asked that, in the event that it's a negative outcome, can we have a meeting with our legal team and the experts to actually discuss it? Because, hopefully, if they don't put it down on paper, which I imagine that they won't, because they won't want to box themselves in, honestly, it feels like with the CCRC, I'm actually fighting against them rather than working with them. And the model, the CCRC, is meant to be working with, wrongfully convicted people and doing their own investigations to exonerate people, not working against you. But I very much feel like I'm working against them, like they are the blockade. But hopefully, if we have a meeting face to face, we'll be able to tease out of them either that they don't know why it's not relevant, in which case you can't say that we're wrong then, or that they do know why it's not relevant, and then we can work with that.
And what happens if that doesn't get anywhere then, Charlotte? Is there nothing more that can be done?
We judicial review. So I'm really hoping, we've got the most amazing legal team. So we've got Felicity Gerry QC and Dean Kingham of Rees Thomas Watson. And they, there's hardly any legal aid that can be claimed in these cases. And they just go and they go and they go, and they've never stopped. And they didn't even have Alex's case at the trial. So they weren't paid for the murder conviction and the trial initially. They've just come on the legal aid appeal funding, which is nothing. It's not.
There is a message in that, isn't there? Because on the whole, people who are convicted of murder aren't supported in that way by experienced lawyers. There's clearly they're seeing something in Alex which
they want to help,
which is different.
Yeah, I hope so.
It can only be that.
They're the most amazing people, and so hopefully judicial review. And I'm really hoping that the National Autistic Society and another organisation called AT Autism, I'm hoping that they intervene in support of, not to support Alex's particular case, but in, for other autistic adults in the criminal justice system, to put an argument forward that, we've got an example here is two big institutions, the Court of Criminal Appeal and the CCRC, not understanding autism and completely bulldozering over two leading experts when they say something contrary to, without any contrary fact to rely on. So hopefully, judicial review. And failing that, we also, Felicity Gerry has drafted this amazing, it's really big, mercy petition. So once everything else fails, the last resort is to ask for mercy, which is a pardon from the Secretary State for Justice, currently Dominic Raab. I had more faith in Robert Buckland because he has an autistic daughter. So we'll at least be aware of the issues. But asking them for pardon, which means Alex will always be a convicted murderer, but he won't be serving the sentence, the term of imprisonment, if that were to be successful. But, they very rarely are successful.
And is it right that with joint enterprise, only one person's got out, John Crilly, out of a whole host of people who are doing the same thing as you for your brother?
Yeah, so the law that convicted Alex was reformed in 2016, and but you can't appeal based on a change in the law because the principle of finality, there has to be an end, law is applied correctly for a period of time or what they think is correct, and they don't believe that you should, once the law changes, you should be able to appeal based on that change. So only one person has been released.
And John Crilly is the man who was heroically fighting the suicide bomber or the assassin on London Bridge, wasn't it? Fishmongers Hall.
Fishmongers Hall, yeah.
Yeah, he's our London Bridge hero. He has a fire extinguisher. So it's just amazing that the only person that the Court of Appeal let out is actually our nation's hero. So and two of the people that were fighting that day on London Bridge, two of the heroes were convicted under joint enterprise. John
Were
Crilly,
they?
Yeah, one of them, obviously John Crilly, had been released.
But another one was.
Yeah, he'd served his term of imprisonment.